Welcome to this event in the West Cork Literary Festival 2019, featuring the writer and academic Eibhear Walshe. My name is Ty Coakley, and I'm delighted to be here today. My name is Ty Coakley, and I'm delighted to be introducing Eibhear. The format is very straightforward, you all know it. I'll introduce Eibhear, say a little bit about his novel, The Trumpet Shall Sound. Then Eibhear will read from the book. Then he and I will have a chat, a discussion, and I hope that you take part in that discussion, be thinking about questions now. This is a great opportunity to ask questions of such a great writer and teacher. And then Eibhear will sign copies of the book, which you don't already have, you can buy here, and I really recommend that you do buy a copy. Eibhear Walshe, Dr. Eibhear Walshe, was born in Waterford, studied in Dublin and now lives in Cork, where he lectures in the School of English at University College Cork and is Director of Creative Writing. Small footnote here, I did a MA in Creative Writing a few years ago in UCC, and if you ever have the opportunity to work with Eibhear and the Faculty of English in UCC, I recommend you grab it with both hands. He has published in the area of memoir, literary criticism and biography, and his books include Kate O'Brien's A Writing Life 2006, Oscar's Shadow, Wild in Ireland 2012, and A Different Story, The Writings of Colm Tóibín 2013. His childhood memoir, Sissy's Abattoir 2009, was broadcast on RTE's Book on One. His novel, The Diary of Mary Travers 2014, was shortlisted for the Kerry Group Novel of the Year Award in 2015 and longlisted for the 2016 International Dublin Literary Award. A very busy and accomplished man. The Trumpet Shall Sound, I'll just give a brief introduction to it. It is 1742 and the celebrated composer George Handel is in Dublin for the first performance of his new work, Messiah. Once the most successful composer of opera in London and feted by aristocracy and royalty alike, Handel is now nearly penniless, recovering from a debilitating illness and out of favour, and his exile in Dublin a sign of his fall from grace. In this exciting new historical novel, Eibhear Walshe recounts Handel's time in Dublin, retracing his golden youth in Rome, his sometimes shady role as an emissary and spy for the Elector of Hanover, who in 1714 would become George I of Great Britain and Ireland, and his doomed first love affair. With energy and insight, this novel leads up to the first performance of the most celebrated work of sacred music, with failure and loss transformed in a moment by the genius of Handel's musical imagination. Ladies and gentlemen, Eibhear Walshe.
Thank you so much, Tig, and lovely to be here. I'm going to open, if I may, just reading from the novel, and it's a shortish piece, and I have a second piece I might read later on, if that's okay. Everyone can hear me all right?
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Now, I think this is probably self-explanatory. The novel is about the first performance of Messiah, so this piece is dated London 1740. And it's set in the house in Brook Street that Handel lived in, and that in fact he owned, where we launched the novel indeed in January. There's a wonderful museum there called the Handel House, which I'd recommend if you get a chance to go there, in Brook Street. It's next to Claridge's, so the next time you're there, as usual, just pop across over to the Handel Hendricks House, because Jimi Hendrix lived there with Handel. He also lived there a little bit, and this is about the composition of Messiah, and it's London 1740. He writes it in 20 days, not daring to stop, forcing himself to compose the music for the passages of scripture and for an overture and a pastoral symphony. He has his servant Peter move the small harpsichord into the back bedroom, where unwelcome summer glare can be shut out with black drapes, and he goes at it with a vengeance. His dead arm is newly recovered, and so fearful of return of the previous year's palsy, he works remorselessly, daring his limbs to fail him again. He sets himself the task of completing 3 sections a day, and so has Peter wake him every morning at 8. He washes, puts on his dressing gown, and then goes straight to work with coffee at his desk, placing himself in prison until each day's work is complete. He works without interruption into late afternoon, blocking all visitors out, letters left unopened, all his life held at bay. As he writes, he eats nothing substantial, but he stuffs dates and grapes into his mouth to keep the sugary sweetness flowing in his blood, and he allows himself no rest until each work is ready to be sent for copying. As a child, he'd been told again and again of his elderly father's great moment of triumph as a doctor. He had heard it so many times that he grew sick of hearing about it, but that story came back to him all these days with a vengeance. A local boy had been playing with his friends one day, when the small knife he threw up in the air came plunging down, and by some kind of wild misfortune fell into the boy's open mouth and lodged firmly in his gullet. Half mad with pain and making wild noises, but still alive, the boy stumbled home, his companions all fled in terror, and the boy's despairing mother brought him to Dr. Handel's house. Instead of accepting the obvious fate for the foolish boy, George's father began a slow process of extracting the knife from the boy's throat, day after agonizing day, inch by inch, pouring soothing liquids down his throat to keep him alive and to keep the throat open, and putting the boy to sleep in a special cage of soft pillows at night. After 10 days, George's father finally managed to draw the knife out safely, and the boy was saved. So, Father, George tells the shade of his long dead old man, I am your equal in stubbornness, but I am both doctor and foolish patient, and the music must be drawn from my throat inch by inch like a dangerous knife.
Thank you, Eibhear, for that lovely reading. One little bit of housekeeping I forgot to mention earlier. If there is an emergency and you have to leave the premises quickly, one of the exits is the door you came in, the entrance, and the other one is through the storeroom out here on my right, on your left. And the people who are near the door, if you can leave first to clear the way, just in case. I'm sure it won't happen. Thanks again, Eibhear, for that lovely reading. I have to say I'm enjoying this moment because it's a role reversal. As I said, Eibhear taught me for a year in UCC, and he got to ask the questions that year, and I had to answer them, so now the roles are reversed. The first question, Eibhear, I'd like to ask you is about the form of the book, about historical fiction in general or biographical fiction. Your previous novel, The Diary of Mary Travers, was a great success, and that concerned a woman who became embroiled in an infamous court case, and now this novel is about George Handel. Can I ask you about that? What attracts you to that form, that genre?
The historical form, I suppose I'm interested in stories that haven't been told, and a kind of hidden history, and a lot of my research as an academic has been on writers or aspects of writers that were neglected, like Kate O'Brien was a writer that hadn't been known, although many people read her and loved her. And it started, I was very interested in the story of Mary Travers because she was a woman that nobody had a good word to say about, and I thought, well, that's somebody worth thinking about if everyone thinks badly of her. Now, Handel is different, and by the way, this is Handel. This is the only early portrait of him from the around the time he was in Germany and in Rome in his mid-20s. Handel is really well known. I mean, we all know him. We know his work, we know his face, we know his music, but we know absolutely nothing about his private life, which he lived very publicly. And he was asked by George II, Mr. Handel, why are you not married? Which is a question that has been asked people over the years. And his answer was, Sire, music is my mistress. I thought, okay, there's a story here. So how did such a public figure manage to have absolutely no recorded private life, even though, how should I say, relationship, even though his own life was really well recorded? So I suppose that's it. Stories that are hidden stories interest me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the other interesting thing about that genre, that form, is how popular it is with readers. I mean, people like Hilary Mantel has won 2 Booker Prizes. George Saunders just won a Booker Prize recently with a book about Abraham Lincoln. Our own Kevin Barry, Colin Tobin, and now Joseph O'Connor. Why do you think it resonates so much with readers too?
Well, history itself is very important, and I don't know about everybody else here, but I'm assuming we're all readers. I know we are. We're all interested in reading. But I read as much history as I do fiction. Is that the same for everybody else? Some people, biography maybe? Yeah. So, I mean, biography is history as well. So, I mean, even if you look around the shelves of the shop and what's selling well, it's the mixture of fiction and history. But the big challenge for me was, and the really enjoyable thing is, when you write a novel, as opposed to writing an academic book or a biography, you can do what you want. You can make things up. You don't have to stick to the facts. And it's called, what's the word for it? Lying? Or fiction writing, whichever word you want to use. Both are allowed. So you can actually write what you want in a novel.
And the next question is then, why George Handel? I mean, you mentioned about the lack of information we had about him, but was it also the music, the Irish connection, the historical period? Did they attract you, or was it
all of those? I love Messiah, and it's my favourite piece of music, and every part of it is miraculous. And as the piece I read there, my imagination was for him that it was in fact a torment to write it. He didn't write oratorio. He was interested in opera. He was at a really low part of his life. And then I was thinking, I mean, I was walking around in Dublin, and I was on Fishamble Street, and I was thinking, you know, he lived here. He could go into St. Werburgh's where he played. You can go into all the places. And how did he get on here? In fact, it was a sign of his failure, his time in Dublin. It'd be like as if Andrew Lloyd Webber was doing, panto in Blackpool or something like that. It's like you've slipped from the West End down to Dublin was not fashionable. It was a sign of how poor he was, how much he was out of fashion. And out of that moment he creates, I think, the most triumphant piece of music in the world. It's partly why in the end Andrew, who's here, Andrew Russell and I and Jane Russell were talking about the whole idea of the title, and in the end I decided, and they were very much in agreement, or we talked about actually having a title from Messiah itself, and such a triumphant one, The Trumpet Shall Sound. I was terrified that it might sound a bit intimidating. Somebody told me it sounds like a Presbyterian tract. So, I don't know, what do you think?
Any Presbyterians here?
There may be. I should have asked one or two of my friends who were Presbyterian. I mean, but I think they meant it not in the good way, you know. So,
it's a great title. You write a very interesting historical note at the beginning of the book, and in this you say, it is entirely possible that the personal life I have imagined for Handel did really happen, but this is a novel and therefore not true or real or honest. But it could be. But do you feel a responsibility to Handel and to Mary Travers maybe when you are writing about them, even though he's dead for many years?
It's a good question. I think with Mary Travers that I really did take her side. I didn't really like her, but I really felt for her. I felt very sorry for her, and I felt very empathetic to her. And that isn't her, by the way. We couldn't find an image of her. That's just an image around the time. But with Handel, I felt a bit more afraid, and maybe I should have been. We launched it in the Handel House in London, and I was standing on my own in the bedroom. We were kind of wandering around. They were very nice to us and helped us. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, you know, will he get up and smite me from wherever he is, you know? Because it is a huge, it's a huge presumption. And I have no idea whether it's true. And I made up 3 characters. But even the fact that I had to invent the 3 men that I think he could have been involved in, and they're utterly fictitious, is a sign of how successfully he shielded and protected his own life. And I find that so interesting about him. He was a Saxon Lutheran who became an enormous success in Catholic Rome in his early 20s, and then became a naturalised Englishman and enormously successful in the Hanoverian court with Italian opera, and became, a landowner and a householder, and became hugely integrated into English society, which I think in the wake of Trump's latest telling of people to go home and Brexit's xenophobia, Handel, who creates this glory of English music, was a man who reinvented himself in two different homelands and gave hugely to London that he died in. He left an enormous amount of money to the Foundling Hospital. He gave so much to all, and he's hugely popular. So, I mean, I think this man fascinated me, who remade himself again and again.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me about it is the research that must have gone into the book. Eilishne Gribna in the Irish Times wrote a wonderful review, and she writes about immersing oneself in the rich, enchanting 18th century Baroque world, which is skillfully brought to life in the pages of The Trumpet Shall Sound. Silk and velvet, crystal chandeliers, and handsome people abound, recreating convincingly the tapestry of the kind of life a celebrated composer of the time lived in palaces, mansions, and luxurious apartments. Can you say a bit about the research you did for the book?
It was really difficult. I had to go to Rome a lot and just be there and, listen to music and walk around and go to palaces and things like that. And, it wasn't easy, so I did that. But I felt my art, needed it. It's also why my latest novel was partly set in Rome. And London, Halle, I went to see his birthhouse. And I should say I got great support from Cork City Council's Arts Office and also from the Arts Council of Ireland in terms of finding out these things. A lot of time in London as well, reading hugely. I'm not a musician, but listening to music, talking to musicians, and finding out about the people that surrounded him. And one character threatened to overbalance the novel. When you're writing, you don't know what you're going to write. I knew I wanted to write about Handel, but I ended up finding out a lot about a woman called Melusine, who was a real person. She was the partner of George the Elector, and she ends up being a really crucial figure in this world, and she almost topples the whole book, and because I found her so fascinating. Because again, like Handel, she's marginal. She's a woman who's had a child by a powerful ruler. She's outside marriage. She's outside, her daughter is outside recognition, and she has to hang on, and then in the end it pays off politically for her. And a bit like Handel himself, it's about these bright, interesting, talented people who had to literally make and remake themselves in a powerful world. So the research was fascinating.
Yeah, but I think the great skill about the research is, and again, Nugwimna hints at this, that it's a bedrock of the story, but it never overwhelms the story. And the pieces with that woman did light up the page, but how did you manage to keep that research down? And I suppose you had to cut out pieces about her, did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you do all the research and the travel and take all the notes, and then you put it all away, and you sit down and you write with no book near you. The only thing I listen to, and I don't normally listen to, is I did, in writing about the first performance of Messiah, I did listen to the music a lot for a while, and then I stopped. So my kind of hint is, do all your research and then leave it alone, because the story has to come alive. You have to actually have people in rooms or walking around or doing things, and you have to leave the research away, and you go to the place, walk around, think about it, and then it has to inhabit. But you're just sitting on your own in your room, and in your mind's eye you're in Rome or London or Dublin or Halle or wherever you're, Hanover. You have to leave the research alone, because otherwise it'll threaten it. When you're writing an academic book, you have to have all of your sources around you. When you're writing a novel, a historical novel, put them away, because what you're doing is telling a story about people.
Yeah, that really shines through. The politics in the novel is really interesting. I didn't know a lot about the politics of the time, but there's another politics in the book too, which is the sexual politics. And Richard Pine, in his review in the London Times, says, and he quotes your historical note, what Handel may have kept secret from his public and his patrons. And that sexual politics about a gay man living in Rome, living anywhere at that time, and being a very famous person, was that an important theme for you?
It's really simple. I couldn't have written this novel 20 years ago and kept my job. Let's be honest. I'm old enough to be able to have been through all these things. And, I'm very fortunate where I work, as Tyke says, and I have many friends and colleagues here from ECC. And I've been there since 91. I can do whatever. I've done whatever I wanted in terms of the research I've followed and the things I've been interested in and the teaching I could do. But I was very privileged and very fortunate with the people I worked with the students, with that world. and also, you know, very fortunate, like say with the novels, to be able to work with someone who impress and do what we wanted to do. But this is a novel of 2019. It is not a novel of 1999 or, you know, all the time I was publishing. And that never occurred to me. Then somebody asked me that. I thought, yeah, actually, that is the case. So it does seem that I'm writing about the past, but actually every historical novel is produced by the year it's written in and thought about. And, you know, even when we were getting ready to go to the Handel House, I was thinking, oh, I wonder will it matter to them, will this... And they were very good. They emailed us, look, we can't endorse fiction, but we don't stop it. So we can't say this is officially approved by us. But at the same time, you're a writer, you write what you want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the themes of desire and loss, because he did depend on patronage from, you know, religious monarchs and so on. So and there's a loss there. I don't want to say too much about the plot of the book, but he does have to balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I don't know whether you picked up on it, Tyke, because it's something I think when we're in UCC in the creative writing section with colleagues and with students and friends, you know, writers are quite selfish and writers are quite ruthless, and so are musicians and all artists. So part of me, at the end of it, I realised that actually what I was writing about was the kind of remorseless selfishness of the creator, which is necessary. And I remember once hearing Seamus Heaney being interviewed, and somebody said, you know, when you're writing a poem, do you think about the readers? A very good question. He said, oh, one should never underestimate the self-absorption of a writer. And what he meant was, it was very funny, but what he meant was, I write for myself, and he was very good at talking about that. And I remember seeing a very good interview with him and his wife about the kind of isolation that he wanted from the family to do his work. And she said, well, that cost us, you know, they were very frank about it. But they were very impressive. So part of me, I think, produced a picture of a man who survived a lot. And actually, the music was the thing. I mean, he abandoned anyone who got in the way because of his kind of desire for the survival of his work, and also freedom. He wanted freedom.
And I think two writers picked up on that in these quotes in the back of the book. One is by Emma Donoghue, and she writes a plausible, sensuous coming-of-age story about a genius wrestling with love and ambition across 18th century Europe. And Joseph O'Connor writes, the story of a truly memorable event in cultural history of Ireland, this fine novel is also a profound meditation on creativity itself, told with imagination, audacity, and tempered by scholarly scruple. So it's a book about creativity in some ways.
And I suppose the bit I read, it sounds awful. There was a film many years ago I saw, a black and white film, made in I think the 30s, of the writing of Messiah, and it's a very nice film, but it has the actor playing Handel, composing everything, and Handel himself said it in a letter, he thinks I did see the heavens above and the great God himself. And actually the piece I read to you there is the opposite. It's not saying, oh, the writing for him was a moment of kind of transformation, that he channeled heaven through his music, although I think it is heavenly music. I see it as more a man at a point of real despair, forced to a task that he doesn't want to do, writing in a form he doesn't want, wondering if his arm was going to give out again. I mean, he would have to play, which he did. He played the harpsichord at every performance of his music to make money, and he lost the use of one limb. So, I mean, he was in his late 50s. He wasn't poor, but he was in danger financially, and this was the act of a kind of a man whose stubbornness. So I don't see the creative act as something uplifting for him. I see it as something quite tortured, actually. But what happens at the end of the novel, just to let you know, they perform it, and what I was interested in is how everyone at the first performance experienced it. And I just leave Handel himself at the end. Like, how did he feel? Like I was thinking, have you created that music? What was it like to hear it for the first time? You know, like this wonderful, wonderful music. You know, but so much of his music is wonderful. You know.
Yeah, you anticipated my next question actually, because it's a very technical thing that you do at the end. I mean, the whole book is about George Handel. The point of view is George Handel. He's in every single scene. And then at the very end, when we hear the Messiah, and we actually do hear it, and the second time I read the book, I put on the Messiah for that final passage, we get multiple points of view. So in a way we kind of rise away from Handel, and the music then becomes a book about the music then, I think.
Actually, because you very kindly, Ty, emailed me just some of the things we're going to talk about today, and you'd said that, you kind of pointed out to me that the closing has in fact, as you said, technically you have Handel all through, and like, there's a lot of characters, so I was a bit afraid that I'd lose the reader, because you meet a lot of people along the way, and I thought, well, what will hold it together? And reading Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall and Bringing Up the Bodies, she's a huge cast, but she has Cromwell the whole time, and that focuses you, and that's what I tried to do. But as you say, as Ty points out, at the end I move out. Actually, it's the first piece I wrote. So I wrote the ending, and then I went off and I wrote the Dublin sections, and then I wrote the Rome sections, and I wrote the London sections. And then I was talking to Andrew and Jane about how to structure it, and they gave me lots of good insights. So the book, as you read it, is not as how I wrote it. In fact, I wrote the end. I started at the end, and I started with the idea of what was it like to sit in that hall, that noon in April, and hear those 24 singers, only 24, and a handful of musicians, and Handel himself playing the harpsichord.
And Dean Swift.
Yes, indeed, who turns up. We don't know whether he went or not, so I wasn't honest about that. But Dean Swift turns up. He didn't like music, and he didn't want Handel to have his singers, and he was himself on the brink of what may have been an inner ear infection that ends up breaking his sanity, and he was really at a very, very unhappy point in his life. But I decided that he goes around to see it, and actually he's not interested in it.
And it's wonderful, but other people are interested, unlikely people as well, so that's a great technical feat, I think. Do you want to read a second piece from it?
The bit I was going to read is...
I think it'd be lovely.
Thanks. Is when the book was came out, I hadn't realised the film The Favourite was also sort of on the go. Have you all seen it? Yeah.
I have a bizarre thing. I decided not to go and see it for a number of reasons. I find the figure of Queen Anne a really interesting figure, and I saw one or two extracts from it. And have you all seen The Favourite?
Yeah.
A few people have. I believe that the performance by Olivia Colman was absolutely heartbreaking, which doesn't surprise me. I think she's a great actress. I think didn't she win an Oscar for it?
Yeah.
And I mean, she
brought apparently heartbreaking sadness to the part, and I couldn't bear to go and see it as a result, because that seems to me, that particular moment of Anne's life, when the whole world was watching her to just know when was she going to die, because they wanted to take who was going to take over. Handel was part of that. He was sent to London as a spy, and so this is the piece I have. I mean, this is my imagining of it, but I think it's true. I haven't made this up, that he was used by the Hanoverians as a kind of tame musician, but basically they needed someone to befriend the doctor, Dr. Arbuthnot, and to kind of basically send back through the manuscripts, the music manuscripts, updates on her health, because it mattered. When she died was when whoever would take power. And this was, the future of an enormous empire, becoming an empire. So this is it. This is Handel at the court of Queen Anne, who's gravely ill, in fact dying. At that, there was something as a stir when a set of doors is thrown open, and Her Majesty enters. Her eyes downcast, a short middle-aged woman dressed in dowdy black, a row of immense pearls around her neck, the only sign of her regal status, apart from her demeanour. She pauses at the door and murmurs something to an attendant lady, who gestures towards the dais, where there's a raised platform at the seat. Her Majesty moves slowly in that direction, those around her bowing as she limps painfully towards her seat. Some chatter resumes around the room as she takes her seat and looks downwards, apparently unconcerned with those gathered around her, but all eyes in the room are intent on watching her. Under cover of conversation, George watches with curiosity. Her still youthful face plump and unlined, an unhealthy pallor about her cheeks. There is a wary expression in her tired eyes as she settles herself into the chair. and darts a few covert looks around the room, the fan held up to her mouth. There's very little talk while she sits there, every so often saying a few words to one of her ladies near her. A large damask stool is placed in front of her, where she props up one foot, and George notices that peeping out from under her skirts, a damp poultice, grey and unpleasant, is tied around her ankle. Nothing much seems to be happening, and Her Majesty speaks to very few people. But at Dr. Arbuthnot's prodding, George is brought forward and bows to her. Her weary eyes are lifted up to his face as she listens to him present compliments and good wishes from the Elector of Hanover. His English for once halting in the beam of her strong, slightly unsettling gaze. She looks up at him for what seems an eternity, taking in with some scepticism, it seems, his fancy velvet coat, the buttons from Venice, the watch chain. After a few moments, in a soft, careful voice, she thanks him in French and tells him she looks forward to hearing his music. He replies in English, and she compliments him on his command of the language. "You're a quick learner, Herr Handel," she tells him, making it not quite a compliment, as she glances down at his well-turned coat. With evident relief at her task completed, Anne turns to ask Dr. Arbuthnot something about her medicine, the rich pearls on her neck swinging and shifting with a sudden movement. George can see from the change in her expression that she trusts the doctor, a gentle, more open look coming into her face as she listens to his words of reassurance. Suddenly, George realizes who the doctor reminds him of. It is of his own father, and the Queen looks at him in the way that the local women looked at his father and trusted him with their ailments and their worries. The Queen is right to trust him, George thinks, remembering how skillful the doctor was at evading all questions about her health. "So, Doctor, I'm wearing the poultice you sent me." "Yes, I'm pleased to see that, Your Majesty. I hope it has brought you some relief." There's something childlike in her eagerness to seek reassurance, and something in the doctor's manner, kind, respectful, confident, strikes George. A memory from years of observing his father's manner with his patients. It seems to George, having seen his father do much the same with the dying, that the doctor knows that Anne will not recover. Thank you.
That's great, Eibhear, again. And there's a great circularity there where you bring Handel's father back into it again. And those pearls turned up later in the book as well, which, you know, the king is gone, long live the king or long live the queen.
Yes. He meets his old friend Melisande, and she has the very same pearls around her neck. So, power has paid off for her, and years of living as a kind of a marginal, indeed an unacknowledged woman and a mother and a partner, and now power has moved again.
Yeah, and Handel allied himself to her very wisely.
Yes.
He backed her on the right horse.
Indeed.
Indeed. Now I want to open out the conversation now to the audience. Does anybody have a question?
Hi, Ava.
Hi, Mike.
First of all, congratulations on your novel.
Thank you.
You say there's not much known about his childhood. What kind of archives are available?
Did I say there was nothing known about his childhood?
Or his private life?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reasonable amount about his childhood. His father was pretty prosperous. I mean, I've been to the House of the Yellow Stag, and it's the museum where, to my annoyance, there's no mention of Dublin as the first place for the performance of Messiah. But I mean, you can see by the house that they were well-to-do. His father was allowed to import wine as part of being a doctor. I don't know whether that's still allowed anymore, is it? But anyway, and his mother was the second wife, so he was the youngest and very much younger than an older family. And he had two sisters that he was very close to. So we know a fair bit about that time. But a number of questions we don't really know is like how he became this young man in 2 years, turned up in Rome, and at the end of 2 years was, living in palaces, the patron, presented to the Pope, and then goes to Venice and becomes this kind of really important figure in opera, and then goes to London and becomes the man that we know of. So we know a lot about his life. There's just literally no record of any partner. Never married, no children, not connected with any woman in his life. And it's clear that he was very close to a number of women professionally, And particularly in the novel I talk about one woman, Susanna Kibber, whom he brought to Dublin for Messiah, who was on the run from a dangerous husband, whom he helped, befriended, trained her up to be a very successful singer. So he liked women, they liked him, he was connected with families, he had close friends, he was a sociable man, he was a popular man, no private life. And then he wasn't a recluse, he left lots of money to friends, to families. You know, he wasn't misogynistic, he was clearly got on very well with a number of the women he worked with, fought with other prima donnas and divas, and he threatened to throw one out a window, but hey, that's the crazy world of opera, you know. And, you know, was very close to kind of a number of families as well. So a convivial man, but no private life. He was a handsome young man, he was an impressive older man, he was wealthy, nothing. It's very odd, isn't it? You know, he wasn't a recluse, he was living in the world, no children, had left a lot of money to the Foundling Hospital. This is quite great interest. So I think there are mysteries, you know. But huge amounts of his life are really well catalogued. There's great archives in, you know, Corums in London, which had been the Foundling Hospital. If you go there, it's just behind the British Library. It's in Bloomsbury. His will is there. Like, there's loads of materials about him everywhere. The Handel House in Brook Street, the Birth House in Halle, loads of stuff.
Any other questions? There's one at the back.
When you're doing your research for historical books, do you sort of set yourself a time limit for research time, or do you just do it until you have all what you consider to be all the information you need? How do you decide when you've done enough research and have to get to the writing?
That's a very good question. Years ago I was starting work on what became the biography of Kate O'Brien, and I asked someone who was a very, very distinguished biographer and very helpful, very nice person, what should I read, because she read a number of biographies that we would have read, and she said everything. She got my heart sank. She was right, you know what I mean? So basically, you follow every single angle, and then something happens that you know that why it's time, when it's time to go. And I think I learned about by doing biographies, and I actually have another one I'm going to do next year, hopefully all going well, on Jane Wilde. I've been very interested in. It's her anniversary the year after next, and we're trying to do a few events to commemorate 200 years since she was born. So I'm doing a short biography. But the thing about it is that I'm doing all the research, I've loads of research, is that you have to give a picture of a person. And that's the bit, you need that for biography, and obviously it's central to fiction. In any fiction, any kind of creative work, if you're writing about characters, whatever, you know, have to give a sense of a living, breathing person. And I suppose I can't explain how you know. Okay, roughly speaking, about a year's worth of preparation and maybe about 2 years of writing in the middle of dealing with very demanding students.
Very demanding students.
Who now, you know, seems to be a very calm and reasonable man, but prima donnas. No. Of course, not true, of course. True. A pleasure always. So actually, to be fair, I mean, because you're always teaching, as I was teaching, that was hugely helpful for the writing, because as you know, that I get the privilege of being able to kind of work on your own work and then go in and work with people who are doing their own work as well, and you continue that. I mean, it's how you solve things. You ask other people, like, how to do
you learn so much from reading other people's work.
Absolutely.
You get ideas,
and for me as well, and I tried. I've been working on Handel maybe around the time when we were working together, and I know I come in after a morning's writing and I might be teaching a class or having a one-on-one, say, consultation on a chapter, and I might say, yeah, you know, I was trying this morning, I was trying to do this and this. Tomorrow I'm meeting a lovely student, a colleague of ours, and she's working on a historical novel, and she sent me a list of questions, and I just thought, brilliant. Like, she really wants, she's got right there. She's like, yeah, how do I do that? How do we do that? And I said, great, we'll talk, you know, let's talk those through tomorrow. So that's part of it, is you do know when the research stops and then you start into it.
But the real trick, I think, and ever manages this, is to hide the research then within the book, like a road that everyone walks on, but it never crops up. It's the real skill, I think. Any other questions? One here.
Yeah.
This wouldn't pertain to your book about Handel because he wouldn't have had any descendants. But I'm trying to write a historical novel about an American woman, Annie Edson Taylor, who went over the Niagara Falls in a barrel that she designed herself. and survived.
Yes.
But she never really married. She made up a lie and said she did marry a Civil War soldier, but wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
But she does have people. She had sisters and brothers, and so look, I think there are relatives.
Sure.
I haven't gotten into that, but so is that a danger as a historical novelist that you're going to get in trouble by making up things about the person that's part of their family?
You're fine.
Really?
Yeah. There's a big problem if it's biography.
Okay.
Potentially, if you were quoting from the work. When did she die?
Let's
say roughly speaking. If it's more than 70...
1900s.
Okay, you're probably better... Okay then. Like 70 years on, say if I want to write a novel about, I don't know, say, Sylvia Plath is a good example, people writing about her. And they couldn't use any of her writings because of the estate. So if you're writing fiction, you're fine, in my opinion. I'm not a solicitor, but you're in my opinion. And that's my solicitor, who is a novelist, Catherine. But you're not quoting from her directly.
No.
And you cannot libel the dead.
You can't
Libel the dead. My new novel about Tyke, he's going to sue me for because he's alive, he can do that. Yeah. Or like vice versa. I couldn't write a fiction about Tyke or he about me because we would sue each other and then get huge publicity.
Yeah, and
enormous books.
I think legally you have to get someone's permission if they're still alive, but if they're dead, I think you're okay.
I think the problem is if you have a living character in a novel, or even more, I've come across this even more bizarrely, you might tell me a story about something interesting that happened to you, and I might put it in a novel to another character, and apparently you can say, no, you took my story and you did it with this other character and you said something. I've heard of cases where they kind of write and object to the publisher and say, well, you went to visit something and this really interesting happened, and then you saw a shooting or something and something happened at it, and I took the story and gave it to a character. But I think once the person is dead and it's a historical novel and not a biography, you're fine.
Okay. Mary, you have a question?
This woman that almost took over the plot, could you say a little bit more about her? You mentioned Susanna Pilsup, but it's not the same person.
No, she's a really interesting figure, and she was a real figure. She was a German woman, young woman called Melisande von Schulenberg, and she was a daughter of a court official in Hanover. And as a young woman, she fell in love with the elector's son, the George I, and they had actually 3 daughters. I only have 1 daughter there, and this got her in real trouble because she was unmarried, and each time she couldn't acknowledge her daughters as her daughters. They had to be presented as her nieces. And her family were very well connected, but it left her very exposed because her lover George was married. He divorced his wife and locked her up in a castle, never saw her again. But she stayed with, they were very loyal to each other, and eventually when he became King of England, she brought him she came with him to England, and she was made the Duchess of Munster. And then she discovered that was an Irish title, not Munster but Munster, and that the Irish titles weren't as good as English titles. So she kicked up, and she was made Duchess of Kendal and Munster. And her daughters married very well, and one of her daughters married Lord Chesterfield. Letters from her father. Remember those famous letters? And all of that world. So she was a very interesting character. Handel didn't know her, but I've made her much more parallel to them each other because she nearly took over. She was involved in the great South Sea bubble, the collapse of. She took bribes from wealthy financiers to get the king to support it, and then it all went wrong, and then they discovered about the bribes. Very lucky not to see jail, but she didn't. So and she died immensely rich. But I'm pretty sure she got Queen Anne's pearls.
And now you see why he had to cut a lot of her from the book.
Yes.
A book on her all by itself.
Absolutely. And I thought, no, I better be careful, because somebody again told me that when you're writing a biography or a novel, sometimes a second character can topple it over. So be very careful that it doesn't actually do that. That someone doesn't because you never know what way your writing's going to take you. And I hadn't intended her to be as central, but there's a scene that I'm very happy with at the end where she comes to see Handel just before he comes to Ireland. In fact, she arranges for him to come to Ireland, and they're debating about death basically, and whether the queen is now dead, and she wants to know what the afterlife is. So, you know, it's she ends up being a very important figure. Actually, the book is a lot about death. I hadn't realised it. I don't think I know why, but anyway.
But he is old and infirm, really, when it starts and when it ends as well.
Absolutely,
and that structure was very interesting. You started almost at the end, and then went back to his childhood, his love affair with Luca, and then him going to Venice and Hal and London.
Yeah.
That structure, Alicia Griffin commented on that, and I thought it really was a great skeleton to build on the book. Did that happen organically, or?
I began it this way. I began it with his first morning, his first afternoon, his first evening in Dublin, and then right back to his life up to that, and then the day of the performance. But I realised that it wasn't really working, so I just opened it the first morning and a letter that he writes, and then go right back to him as a young man, because I wanted to write the younger parts of his life as a kind of energy of being young and having the whole world ahead of you. And then a lot of the middle section is about being middle-aged and getting old and dealing with that. And I just thought, no, I want more of the youthful stuff before we get to the middle-aged and the older things and things that were going wrong for him. Because I wanted that sense of energy and the sense of a young man, 100 crowns in his pocket, coming to Rome, knowing no one, and making a life, and the kind of sense of adventure, you know.
And that really is captured. I have time for one more question from the audience. If one more here.
What do you say to some historians who look down on historical fiction? I know this because my brother is a military historian and he refuses to read any historical novels, partly because he thinks he might take something from that and believe it's a fact.
I can see why he wouldn't want to. I mean, you know, they talk about people who write or teach history talk about, say, things like the Michael Collins film now kind of shaping sort of the history of Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera, or what's the Wind That Shakes the Barley, or, you know, we think of hundreds of films that have shaped. And I mean, some films are very good. In Gone with the Wind, although it's written from a kind of one perspective, it does give you a sense of what was happening. I mean, when you realise in Gone with the Wind that in fact the men are all going out, you know, to avenge what's happened to Scarlett, they're the Ku Klux Klan. You know what I mean? It's still the truth of what was happening. I mean, it's presented as a good thing, and it's presented from that point of view. So I get it if you're a historian, you want to write history, because the sad thing is that people remember novels and films more than they remember history. And I studied history, I love history, and I had to make certain decisions. I mean, as far as I can do it, I was as accurate as I could be about the kind of facts that I used. But then I thought, this man has no private life. I'm going to have to invent one. And then you're reading, you're thinking, well, which is true? So, for example, I really tried to get the first performance right. How many people? Where was it? Where were they all sitting? Who was taking part? There was only 2 women singing. The choir was all men and boys, that kind of thing. You know, things that we just don't think about. So, I mean, for me it was bizarre. I was getting a mixture of facts right, but also to try and imagine a world. So I really get it. If you're a military historian and you want to do it right, what if you see a film and you think, you know, so many famous films. Is it Krakatoa east of Java? Krakatoa's west of Java? Or, you know what I mean? There's all of these things that end up, you know, things that we know from films and books that are probably not accurate, but we remember them better. So I kind of get that. But I presume historians don't like historical novels. I don't really know, but let's not be hard on historians. We need their work to do ours. But
and let's not be hard on novelists either.
No.
Speaking of which, you mentioned a biography you're working on, Eibhear. Is that your first work after The Trumpet Shall Sound?
No. When I finished writing The Trumpet Shall Sound, I had some time, as you do, to wait to see what's going to happen to it. So I wrote another novel. So that's finished. And I'm hoping to see that. I'd love to see that out. And that's a novel about the first time I think I've done it. I've written a novel, I've completed it, about the novelist Elizabeth Bowen. So it's a novel about a novelist. and it's about her experience of living in London during the Second World War, and particularly her relationship with the diplomat Charles Ritchie. And so I've already read a piece from it. I did a lecture on it in Paris last year, and someone turned up in the audience who knew Charles Ritchie and was able to tell me a lot about him. A very nice man who, as a very young man, had been a diplomat in the Canadian Diplomatic Foreign Service and had been serving with him at the end of his life. So that's set in London, set in Rome, and set in Cork. Not Bantry, sadly, but Farahee, the train station in Cork. Finally, I got Kent Station, which I spent my life going out of. Cork.
And Bowen's Court, is it?
Bowen's Court, absolutely Bowen's Court. The church, the graveyard, everything. So that's done. And now I'm hoping, I'm starting to work on a biography of Jane Wilde, of Speranza. I've also put together an edition of her essays with that of her husband, William Wilde, so they're hopefully nearly done as well. But Elizabeth Bowen is where I'm kind of looking to now, so she's, I hope, let's knock on wood, I'd love to be back here maybe at some point talking about Elizabeth Bowen if it happens. So please send me good vibes on that one.
I'm sure you will be, and on behalf of everybody, please a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.